Hello, everyone. This is Senator Saud Anwar. I know in the last few days we have had a lot of conversation around qualified immunity. This is about the Police Accountability Act that the House has recently taken into consideration, and it's going to be presented in the Senate within this week. But I wanted to have a discussion about this topic, which is again qualified immunity. What is it about that in this bill? Is it abolishing it, as some people are suggesting, or is it adjusting it, or qualifying it, or is clarifying it? So as I discuss this bill, I want to make sure we know that we are talking about Bill 6004, but the LCO number 3700. There are other LCOs that are out there, and I know people, when they're looking at it and they're trying to assess the bill, if you look at the language, it's all about the language, and the language of 3700 is what has been discussed. This is the bill that actually the speaker had ordered for the vote at 9:03 a.m. This was voted with yes, 86 people said yes and 58 had said no in the House. So the current organized messages that I'm seeing, and that's why I wanted to put this out there, because there's a lot of information that's out there, and a lot of that information may not be fully accurate. So I want to make sure that we have a discussion around the facts around this. This was something that I saw in one of the legislators' Facebook, which was basically attacking the Democrats and saying the Democrat legislators turned their back against the law enforcement. Of course, this is close to elections, so everybody's going to do what they are going to do. It's important to have facts around this. The same legislator or another legislator had said that this vote abandoned them when they needed us the most, stripped away any of the protections that were afforded to do their job safely. And I think this is something we should talk about and ultimately put all the lives and the lives of the general public in danger. Now, this is a very big statement that is being made by some of the people, and this is coming from an organized position. So I think it's worthy to have a discussion around that as well. And the fiscal impact of this bill will have on local municipalities and cities would be mind-boggling. So quite a concerning things that are being claimed. So we'll look into this data, and I want you to stay with me through this conversation with some data and facts and information that's going to help clarify some of these things. Somebody else has sent me from the EMS groups that they said the EMS would not be able to work on this bill because the police cannot do this. Again, this is a very strategic communication that is being sent out, and it's inaccurate. And then let's go through that as well. So I want to share my perspective. So I want everybody to be aware where I stand and how I look at things going forward. These conversations should not be binary. So what's happening right now is that people are saying you're either with us or against us. That's not how policies are made. That's not how we're going to have a future of a community. We need to make sure that anybody who's supporting the bill does not automatically mean that they're against the police. And anybody who's not supporting the bill does not automatically mean that they are against the African American community. And I think this binary conversations that we are having across the board are not healthy for a society, not healthy for a community. So we need to actually look at the nuanced perspective, look at the bill in different parts of it, and then look at the details and the facts around it with the language. So I think that's important. I support Black Lives. I believe Black Lives Matter. This community, our community, African Americans, have not had the opportunities. They have actually been impacted negatively. The data is very clear. The situation is very clear. It is in our faces, and we have to stand up and then have a protection for our community members. And also we need to know what happens around the country impacts us. So we have to have a plan of action, recognizing that this is a matter of time, that things are happening in other parts of the country, but we have to be proactive and protective and preventive around this. And one of the strongest predictors of a team's performance is the bad apple in the team. Again, every team has a risk of having bad apples. We need to make sure that our police departments do not have those bad apples, and that's something we have to look at. Another thing from my perspective is it's important that police officers to have qualified immunity. So I am supportive of having qualified immunity so they can perform the discretionary function of their jobs without fear of liability. I think this is an important thing that has allowed the police departments to do this. Now, look at it as a physician. I have to carry liability insurance. The nurses that I work with have to have their own liability insurance. Every professional in the country has liability insurance. The only ones who do not have it are pretty much the police department that I understand as of right now. And you can correct me if police departments have police officers have their own liability insurance, but I do not think that they do because of the qualified immunity. But I do believe that they need to have the qualified immunity because of the nature of the job. And I think that's the critical piece, and that's necessary. So I am supportive of this. It's important for the municipalities to have professional law enforcement organizations to protect all citizens. And I think that's an important part that everybody should agree with. And it's important that the law enforcement use appropriate force when needed without fear of frivolous lawsuits impacting the municipality or the police officers personally. That's a no-brainer too. So that's something that we should be working towards. And this bill does not impact that. And I'll show that to you in a second. Absolute power is not healthy for any individual, group, or organization. Preventive policies can protect the public, police, and the municipalities. And policies and investments can bring public police trust to a better place where needed. So again, there is a very strong public police trust in many parts of our state, but there's certain places in our state it's not as good, and we need to work towards it, and we need to make sure that the policies are going to be able to help us out around this aspect. Status quo is not acceptable. I know some people would love the status quo, which it's helping them, but I think we need to take everybody together in a community, everybody together in a state, and that's what is needed. This is the part that actually bothers me. One of the most thing is the current law, the way they are in Connecticut and beyond. An individual like Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd, would not be held liable in a civil lawsuit. The 4 people who were there, who are the murderers, would actually not be impacted by the civil lawsuit. This is very important for us to recognize that the way the laws have been set up with the immunity, qualified immunity, that actually is going to have the civil part of the lawsuit protect them. And we need to make sure the criminal part is there, but we have to have a responsibility that nobody ever is going to do this, murder people, and then be able to not be impacted civilly. And knowing the actual document is of great value because, of course, I'm going to share some of that with you as well. And what is in the law, what is the proposed law is going to be critical rather than hearsay, and all the information that we are seeing is going to be of value. And taxpayers are also the victims of the bad apples in the police departments, and I'll prove that to you because the taxpayers are the ones who are paying for all of them, and then there's no plan of action. Now think of this, I'm actually a state senator, but I was a mayor. I've been a town council member for some 2011 to 2019, and 4 of those years I was a mayor of a town. So I know what's going on in some of these aspects, and I think I talk to my fellow mayors as well, and it's a common important value that the taxpayers end up paying for some of the bad apples. So basic concepts we have to understand is Connecticut is better, but could be far better. And this is some of the data that actually was in Hartford Current, that the police had killed 21 people in Connecticut in the last 5 years. Here's a look at the deadly encounters. So there's a detailed article that was on June 5th to 2020 in Hartford Current by Nicholas Rondinon. You need to actually see that, which talks about the individuals who were impacted. So yes, we've had our share of problems in our state as well. Thankfully, far less than many other places, but one is too many. And we need to have a plan of action and have a strategy to try and prevent this and make sure there's a trust in the communities. Understanding civil versus criminal laws. And I think I touched on this a little bit, but in the civil law, now this is what we are talking about. That's the goal of this part of this bill that is being proposed. The rights and duties between individuals. So what is happening is a society can bring a whole criminal charge against the murderers right now, but the civil rights, the civil laws cannot be bring about the individual and the family. And there's a wrongful act to a person, and I think that's harm to a person is what we have to talk about, and the person who's been impacted, and the ones who have suffered, or the family of the people who have suffered, can bring about the lawsuit. Those options have not been there in some of these situations, and preponderance of evidence is a little difference between beyond reasonable doubt versus preponderance of evidence within the civil law. And damages to compensate for the harm or the decree of to achieve an equitable result. This is something that is more so on the civil side. I think this bill is looking at the civil side of the equation because the criminal part has been in existence, but the criminal part does not help the families of the victims or the survivors when something like this happens in any situations. And that's a part that I think is worthy of look in more detail. What is the current status of qualified immunity? There's something that we need to know from the federal. And 2001, we had the qualified immunity based on the federal law, which is Saucier versus Katz 2001. And there are two legal tests that are looked at. The first legal test is that is there a constitutional violation? If there's a constitutional violation, that has there been a violation of the clearly established constitutional right? This is important because when somebody says that the second part of the legal test means that there needs to be a prior court holding the conduct unconstitutional. If there is one, then automatically the first part is yes and the second part is yes, and then the qualified immunity is no longer valid in that situation. And that's been in 2001. And the only challenge is that when you say that there has been no prior court holding on some of those areas, if there's no prior test that is there, then the established part of the constitutional right does not exist. I'll say this again, this is confusing. So for example, in the George Floyd case, there is a prior a court case in which the person walked away with murdering an individual. And because of that previous court case with the civil part of the lawsuit, there is a likelihood that this would be the murderers would be protected against the murder from civil lawsuit from qualified immunity. And this is the challenge that we have. 2009, this changed further because in Pearson versus Callahan 2009, the constitutional violation part was changed, and it says that the constitutional claim is undefined, so the possibility of clearly established law becomes unachievable. And so that actually confuses the whole situation, that results in a challenge of how do we deal with the first part of the legal test, and the second part of the legal test is sort of dependent on the first. So it has become a gray zone with respect to some of the parts of the bill. And that's beneficial to some people, but it's also not healthy from a society perspective. That causes a problem. But the qualified immunity allows police to escape civil liability for violating a person's rights under Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act when those rights are not clearly established. Think about this, that your civil rights would not necessarily be protected based on the qualified immunity aspect. And we need to define that further and look at it in more depth and detail. And this is where the litmus test of these murders is that actually they will not be impacted by this in many respects, based on the understanding and the historical cases that we are looking at. So another concept that I want everybody to know about is the Fourth Amendment of our Constitution, where it says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Critical part of our the Fourth Amendment actually is about protection. I think Justice Sotomayor said this probably in the best way possible. She had said that the qualified immunity renders the Fourth Amendment hollow. I'll repeat this. The qualified immunity renders the Fourth Amendment hollow. And I think that's why the federal government at some point will have to wake up and look at this from a federal perspective at some point. But right now, I think the states have a responsibility to make sure that there is a protection in place, and a clarification in place is also necessary. Taxpayers are also the victims, and I'll share this with you. The US cities are paying millions to settle police lawsuits. And then this is back in 2014, and this was the time the Baltimore Sun did a detailed report in September 2014, where they looked at millions of dollars that were paid out in some of the costs. It was the largest payouts on each and every different case that they were looking at, and they have shared that in the data. And it is worthy to look at how the police actions or poor actions by individuals within the police department was causing the municipalities and subsequently the taxpayers to settle these cases at a very, very high price. And then that actually caused the taxes to go up, and then that caused many challenges for the community. And this is happening across the country. And if somebody wants to get something out of this conversation, ask the police departments how many lawsuits that they actually have settled, each police department and the municipalities, and how much was paid out. And they will say they cannot tell you because of the legal reasons for it. And that's common because that's not allowed. And then that's where the hidden cost of all of these challenges are there, that the victims, the second victims, the taxpayers are being impacted by. So I think it's worthy to just look into this, get as much detail about it, because this process, and then the other part that you have to ask about is that what happens to those individuals which have led to those lawsuits which were settled. And you'd be surprised how many times those individuals continue to serve in the various different towns, different communities, and then move around if some situations. And then they actually are high risk. Think about this from another professional. If there was a physician who actually was a surgeon, and they were causing complication and were dying, and they kept functioning, and then they kept killing people with their wrong actions, and they kept staying in their profession. And then when they were asked to leave from one hospital, they would go to another one, and they would continue to function in that. So that kind of a malpractice is criminal, if you will. And everybody becomes part of it when they allow that to happen and remain in the picture. And that something is surprising, that you will be shocked how much this is at times happening. And that information is all hidden because of various laws that are there. So you don't even know about it, and you just hear the good part of this, and the not so good part of this is protected because of a variety of policies that are out there. So Chicago Sun talked about the cost in Chicago in the same way in 2014. Um, this was the important part. Do police officers pay settlements against them out of pocket? Absolutely not, because 99.98% of that was the taxpayers were paying it. This was done by Joanna Schwartz, New York Law Review from Yale. She actually published this, and there's some amazing look at some of the work that Dr. Schwartz has done, and that'll tell you about qualified immunity and the numbers and the statistics around it across the country, and how they are impacting people and their society. The change is not happening fast enough. You would agree with this. Thousands of complaints, like I said, was that the complaints come, and because there's no incentive to fix it, everything is sort of hidden. There's no political pressure to address this, and people just keep staying with the same number of people who are same type of individuals who continue to act the way they have been. Look at the murders of George Floyd. Derek Chauvin, what kind of complaints that he had before, and remain in the workforce the way it is? Which other profession that's allowed? Which other profession would allow people who have that kind of a mindset to continue to stay in those professions? Now, he doesn't represent the people in Connecticut, thankfully, and Connecticut is far ahead. But can we be better? Can we have structural improvements that would reduce the probability of something like that happening? That's the question. Can we reduce the probability of something like that happening in our state? And then people are missing the point of the issue and why this needs to be done. And it's important and valuable thing to be done. But we have to have protections in place for the police as well. Understanding the current status of qualified immunity and how it plays out, I think this is worthy to look at. So let's say we have one bad apple, and usually it's one and who has a wrongful injury to a community member and the person or the victim. That individual would actually like to sue the person who actually harmed them and hurt them, but they will be restricted because of the qualified immunity. They will have a lawsuit against the municipality. The municipality will more or less sooner or later will settle this lawsuit, and if it's a frivolous lawsuit, the municipality will win, of course. But if it has some legitimacy, then they will be settling it. Now, if there is legitimacy, then why is it that so many municipalities are settling these lawsuits? There is some legitimacy to it, or the headaches are so much significant. But I think it's worthy to look at that aspect and not forget it. Ask in the budgets how much money is used for that, and go into the depth. Why is there some money hidden at times, and how do we know about this? So this is worthy to have an understanding, because only 0.02% is being paid by the perpetrator. Others are not being paid. So as a result, the municipality wants to change a meaningful management of the perpetrator. Is it really happening? Who has that data if it's happening? It has not happened historically based on the investigative reports. People are not actually fixing the people who are causing problems. They're not being removed because there's no incentive to remove them, and the contracts are actually not allowing them to remove them sometimes. So guess what? Taxpayers, you are paying for it. So the claim that the taxpayers are going to pay more and municipalities will pay more is inaccurate. If in the current status it's happening, and then we need to actually have a discussion about this, and that's why I'm putting this all in front of you so you understand how this plays out. Here are the parts of the bill that I want you to know about. This is about the section 41 that we have looked at, and this is the one that was added, and this section is different in the current LCO that I actually named earlier. And I've marked the parts. Part B is that any person or class of persons of the equal protection of laws of this state, or the equal privileges and immunities under the laws of this state, including without limitation the protections, privileges, immunities guaranteed under the first article of the Constitution of the state. So no police officer acting alone or in conspiracy with another shall deprive any person or class of person equal protection of law. There's nothing wrong with it. It's only saying that people need to have equal protection. If you have a problem with equal protection, then we have a problem in our understanding of what laws should be. And then if you say that people need to have equal privileges and immunities under the laws, it's equal. That's all that's asked of. And then that's what is being said in the Constitution of the state of Connecticut. No brainer. We live in Connecticut. We have to follow the Constitution of Connecticut. So nothing that should make a person have panic or anything just by this part of the law that is actually in the lines that are mentioned up here. And then the next part, part C, is that any person aggrieved by the violation of the subsection B of this section may bring a civil action for equitable relief or damages in the Superior Court. A civil action brought for damages shall be triable by jury. Now, that is saying that if somebody is not being treated the way they're supposed to, and they have proof of that, and then there's something that's going to clarify this in a second in section D, which is very important around this. They would have a right to be able to bring a civil action of equitable relief or damages. Now, will this stick? Will depend on a number of things. In any civil action, this is number D I'm reading, in any civil action under this section, government immunity shall only be a defense to claim for damages when the time of the conduct the complaint of the police officer had an objectively good faith belief. Now, I want you to pay some attention to this. This is the language which actually protects the police department. If the police officer had an objectively good faith belief that such officer's conduct did not violate the law, then actually they do not have to worry at that point. So this is the part, section D of section 41 of the bill. Lines 1957 to 1962 would actually help you understand that this bill, as it is being relayed to you, is going to take away everything from the police department. No, if a police officer has had an objectively good faith belief that they're doing the right thing and did not violate the law, they actually have their immunity. So now you're going to say, why is this fuss about? And I'm going to say, yes, that's my question. What is this all fuss about? So first of all, people are saying you need to have equal treatment of people. Fair. And if you do not treat people fairly, they have a right to go to a court. However, their right to go to the court is going to be impacted if the police officer has an objectively good faith belief that they did not violate the law. This was all the anxiety and panic and all these emails and nastiness that is going on across the state for this language. So that's, I think, worthy to look at this. Then talking about immunity shall not be a defense in civil action brought in this case. So I just wanted you to get this idea what we were talking about. The next part, I think it's looking at line number 1965, section E, is that each municipality or law enforcement shall protect and save harmless any police officer. This is exactly what's going on right now. If somebody actually sues the municipality or the police officer, the police department, and the municipality will protect that police officer. Fair. That's no different than before. So they will take care of their legal fee and so on. That's what's going on. In an event, such officer has a judgment entered against him or her that this individual was doing this from malicious reasons and willful act and wanton, and then the municipality shall be reimbursed by that officer. So why should any taxpayer be paying for a criminal who is using the honorable profession of a police officer to harm and maim and kill and harm other people in the community based on malicious reasons? I'm a taxpayer. I don't want to pay for a person who's a criminal wearing an honorable professional police officer's uniform, because he or she do not belong in that position. So if they are going to do that, then the municipality has every right to say, you know what, you pay us back because we have no intention, no business to be paying for you. This is what the language is saying, which is protecting the taxpayers. This is protecting the taxpayers from wrong actors. They are bad apples. Everybody agrees with that. Every single police officer that I've talked to, they say they're bad apples. So how are you going to treat the bad apples? You can't just eat the bad apples and expect your stomach to be well. That's why you need to have a protection against bad apples. And this is what this bill is doing. Next line is that if any civil action brought under this section of the court finds that the violation of subsection B, this section was deliberate, willful, and committed with reckless indifference, the plaintiff may be awarded cost and reasonable attorney fee. Standard language. If they are harming, an individual is doing deliberate, willful, committed, reckless indifference, that is actually going to, they should pay for it. That's what all this conversation and things are about. Keep in mind, this is the average, any town in the state of Connecticut, any municipality, this is the oath that people are supposed to take in the police departments. They say that I do solemnly swear that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the United States of America and the state of Connecticut and will support the Constitution and laws thereof. So help me God. So this bill is saying that if you are taking that oath, we want you to follow that oath. And if you don't follow that oath and you willfully harm the citizens of our state, you will pay for it. That's all. And that's the whole idea. So what this does is that if a bad apple is going to actually do wrongful injury and the community member is impacted, they can bring a civil lawsuit. So this is not abolishing the qualified immunity, it's adjusting it and clarifying it. It is not abolishing it. Actually, if it is not done in objectively good faith, only moves forward in that case. If somebody is not doing harming the others in objective, not in a good faith, then they are in trouble. Then the qualified immunity is removed. Otherwise, the qualified immunity still stays, and in overwhelming majority of the cases, it will still stay. And if somebody is doing bad things in bad faith in the police departments, I know each police officer wants to get rid of them because they're giving them bad name. So this is where they should be sued, and the municipality and the taxpayer should be paying it. This is what the whole thing is about. And then the municipality has every reason to fix their bad apples, every reason to try and take care of them, because they become a liability for the good name of the municipality, the good name of the police officers, the good name of the entire department. And you can actually fix that all together and know that there's going to be a financial cost to it, and the taxpayers should be asking these questions so that they can actually make sure that they don't pay increased taxes for the individuals who are actually bad apples. This is what the bill is doing. If the status quo and you want to keep paying the taxes for the bad apples, maybe you should say no to this. But that should not be the reason we should have bad apples, because it's not doing anything to keep the community together. So back to what I was saying, it's important that police officers have a qualified immunity, and they do based on this bill. It is clarified, it's adjusted so that they can perform the discretionary functions of their job without fear of liability. It is important for municipalities to have professional law enforcement organizations to protect all citizens, and it's important that the law enforcement use appropriate force when needed without fear of frivolous lawsuits impacting the municipality or the police officers' personnel. Absolute power is not healthy for any organization. Preventive policies will protect the public and police, and policies and investments can bring police a public trust better place, in which is much needed at this time in some parts of our state. So the proposed bill would address individuals like Derek Chauvin and his alleged accomplices who murdered George Floyd, and municipalities and taxpayers would be protected from the actions of malicious and willful bad apples. This is what this is about. So this is directly read from the bill, and you should actually not get confused from the information that you're going to be given by various people with various agendas. You have gone directly to the source, and that's why I wanted this to be there for you.